Can I get everybody's attention?
You can have these Rolos.
I want to welcome everybody to our November 10th, 2014 work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on these items tonight. Tonight we've got 4 items on our agenda. Agenda item number 5 will be discussed at our December 8th work session. When public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item, so if you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card and turn it in to the city clerk right here. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of each item. Once the item is called, no other public comment cards will be taken. Sudi, do we have any public comment cards?
We do not on the first item, sir.
Okay. And before we get to the first item, I just want to say what an honor it is to have our school board representative Katie Reeves here and Patrick Burke with Fulton County School System. And always want to take the opportunity. Everybody talks about, and I know later we're going to hear from Laurel, and everybody talks about what a great place Milton is to live, and we're dealing with preservation and trying to balance growth and whatnot, but one of the main reasons that Milton's such a great place to live and everybody wants to live here, the quality of our life is because of our schools. So Fulton County does a remarkable job in our area. So if Sudi, if you'll please call the next item, and we're excited to have you guys here.
Our next item is update from Fulton County Schools, and this is being presented by Mr. Patrick Burke, Deputy Superintendent of Fulton County School System.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. We're just trying to get out periodically to our municipal governments to give updates on how we're progressing in our capital program. I know that we received a lot of public support for the 1-cent sales tax, and we feel an obligation and responsibility to come back to you on a regular basis and give you updated information on how we're doing and executing the program. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Milton, the green, yeah. We like green and gold. Okay, very good. I'm going to follow along here. My eyes are getting worse and worse, so I have to have my own copy in front of me. So today, we're just going to do a quick review of the program execution to date. I want to talk a little bit about revenue projections and what we're seeing on the cost side of the house from a construction perspective, and then we'll get into a more interesting conversation about what types of things are happening or being planned for within the city of Milton area. Oh, sorry. So revenue projections. When we first started planning for this capital program, it was back really in end of 2009 or early 2010. So we've been at the planning process for capital execution for some time. Council probably recalls that the SPLOST referendum passed in November of 11, and revenue collection started in July of 2012. So that's when the actual program got up and going. We've had a lot of revenue projection fluctuation over time. When we originally projected this, we remember having conversations with the public about a $900 million budget. And what's happened is we've had subsequent legislation that has changed property tax or changed taxation on things like automobiles. Automobiles represents about 8 to 10% of the revenue that we receive in sales tax collection. So when the state came in and changed the law about that and now gives us a forgiveness on the birthday tax, which we love, it does impact our sales tax revenue. So initially we adjusted that down, so our sales tax revenue was down to about $742 million projected. Most current projections, because the economy's been turning up, are closer to 221. Has not had an impact on execution yet. We are starting to see a tightening between revenue and expenditures, projected expenditures. The economy turning up has been great from a revenue perspective, but what we're seeing is imbalance in supply and demand on the construction costs. I'm sure the city is seeing it as well as you go forward with public procurement of construction projects, but we're starting to see a pretty substantial increase in construction cost related to skilled trades like HVAC and those sorts of things. So Not at a point where we're concerned in terms of the execution. We think we're going to be able to execute everything promised to the taxpayer, but it's something that we continually monitor on a regular basis. Just reviewing programs that have impacted Milton, and I'd be remiss if I didn't hit Cambridge High School, which of course opened in 2012. We've completed the punch list on this, and we're just doing warranty work at this point. We do have a couple items still outstanding on this program. 99 instructional units, 320,000 square feet. This was designed by CGLS Architects and executed by Evergreen Construction. We are in the process of doing a little expansion, and I know this sounds odd having just opened the school, but right at the end of the design process, our CTE program and group, which is our career tech and education folks, had come to the construction staff to ask, could we add in a program around veterinary science? And it was too late by that time. We had procured the project. So what we decided to do was go ahead and stub out and run conduit and plumbing out to the site where this would be located and build it separately on the site within the next capital program. That's coming to fruition right now. We're in the process of finalizing design. This is projected to be constructed and opened in first semester 2015, so in the upcoming school year. It's one instructional unit, but you can see what's going on here. We've got a typical sort of classroom design. There's a lab setting, and then it ties to a pole, kind of almost like a pole barn idea. We would not house livestock here, so let me be clear, we're not intending on bringing livestock into the city of Milton, but it would allow us to work with local organizations, local farms to bring in livestock to create real experience opportunities for our students in the city of Milton. So we're really excited about this project. One of the bigger projects that's ongoing at the moment is an addition at Hopewell Middle School. This is scheduled to open next fall as well. Currently under construction, it's Hogan Construction is the CM at Risk construction management firm. The designer is Stevens & Wilkins, which is our middle school prototype designer. It is a net 15 instructional units, which just means 15 classrooms. It's situated to occur, and I think the council is familiar with this design, situated to occur on the back side of that property. It's going to be in two separate locations, basically building off those back wings. It's a little bit different design. We went through a process of engaging our instructional leaders about what types of classroom space they needed to achieve their objectives. We had a conversation about a year ago with the public about this concept of traditional classroom design, which is largely what's in those classrooms within that building today, versus a more immersive design or flexible design that allowed different types of learning environments for our students. And we did decide to incorporate some of that within the Hopewell model. So if you look at the floor plan, and it's kind of hard to see on here, but hopefully you can see on your copy in your screen before you, they're broken up into learning spaces, and the idea is to sort of make the physical environment aligned to the middle school groupings model so that you have your core classes all working together as a team approach in middle school, and you're creating a space that allows that collaboration to happen. So it has a lot of more interconnection, interdependency, and the principal has in mind how he wants to use this space, and obviously he was a party to those conversations to design the space the way he wanted it to sort of lay out. Not a lot of change, but it does allow some flexibility within the learning environment to do more differentiated learning. And there's more flexible spaces here for if they want to do sort of small group projects, they can break those students out without needing a full classroom to do so. Another large project that's coming up here fairly soon, Crabapple Crossing Elementary School is scheduled to get a fairly significant renovation. This is currently in design as we speak, and it will be procured. I think it's actually on the street right now. If it's not, it will be on the street very soon. Fairly substantial renovation this summer, and we do anticipate it will have a wonderful impact on the environment of that schools. A lot of these types of renovations aren't things that people see, but these are the things that people, let's put it this way, when you hear something has gone wrong. These are the types of projects that you do so that you don't get those calls about disturbing the instructional environment. It's a lot of mechanical work, HVAC work. It's just due for replacement, so we're going to see a significant improvement in building temperature control, better environment. The kids won't feel it as much, but it'll create that learning environment that we expect our kids to have within our schools. We've had a number of system-wide projects. These are things that we try to get early wins on and try to touch as many taxpayers as quickly as possible with the program. One of the early projects we did roll out was this concept of sports flooring at elementary schools. We used to have carpet in our, what we call our multi-purpose room. It's really the gymnasium for the elementary schools. And we've replaced it with this rubberized sports flooring, which is a more durable product, better life cycle costing, and it's a better tool for the type of activities that are happening in those areas. It also opens up an additional amount of opportunities for partnerships with local groups that want to use those spaces. They tend to like this type of flooring versus, obviously, the carpet. We're also in the process of rolling out a playground upgrade district-wide. It affects 37 elementary schools. We have more than 37 elementary schools, but the reason it's only touching that number is many of those schools, of course, are new. And so those schools that are new, like the Birmingham Falls of the world, would not receive an upgrade. But other schools that have not had an upgrade for better than a decade will receive upgrades under the current program. That was an oversight under our last capital program, and this is making up for that. We had a lot of work to do. It's interesting that what you think of as the easy part of that project, or you think of that as an easy project, and we thought initially it would be a lot of equipment replacement, but then when you go out there and you visit the sites, it ends up being a site development project. And I know for those of you in construction, you can appreciate it. It's a lot of drainage issues and trying to create the proper space for those play structures to live on, and that's a lot of the work. We've also made a number of improvements on safety and security. I don't know if the audio-visual, I was going to show just a real quick video. The types of improvements we're making in security. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm doing it on mine, not on yours. Can you hit just enter and play? Thank you.
The school is really good. It's really safe. I feel safe when I am coming to school here. It feels like you're okay. Like you don't have to worry about the things that might bother you, or it gives you a better opportunity to learn.
With our new doorbell system that we have, it's going to be a little bit harder for people to come into the building. And we've taken a lot of safety precautions up front to make sure that our school is safe and only the people who are supposed to be in the building are in. When they're stopped at the door, they have to ring the doorbell and they will be asked what their purpose is for coming into the building.
Good morning. Welcome to Harriet Tubman. The nature of your visit today.
Once they've clarified their purpose, they will be directed to open the door and to come to the front office so that they can sign in. A visitor who's coming to visit the school should always be prepared first with their ID.
Good morning. Can I get your ID, please? Sure. Thank you. If I could get you to put this visitor badge on and keep it on while you're in the building for me so they know you did sign in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Because this school is the perfect school in the world. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Kids always say it better than adults, right? So we've made a number of security enhancements as well. We're going to continue to invest taxpayers' dollars around this. Safety is obviously a primary goal of our mission, and without safe environment, everything else that we do can't happen. So we have put in place these front door access controls. We're still in the final stages of implementing. We have a couple of schools that are still either under construction or we're trying to find the right option based upon the existing architecture. But those systems allow us to provide better access to who's entering the building. Once they're entering, you saw the visitor identification scanning system. Many schools have those already, but what we've done is we've standardized not only the tool, but how it's used. And so that tool now goes and hits both the Georgia and National Sex Offender Database when that scan occurs, and then it allows us to keep track and send alerts to appropriate individuals if we had somebody in the building that didn't belong there. That's also allowed us to tie in other processes like our volunteer processes so that schools have better surveillance of who's in their building and what types of things they have completed. In Georgia, as you may or may not know, anyone who visits a school is a mandated reporter for child abuse and neglect. And so we've tied that tool that we have on training parents and that requirement to the visitor identification system. So we basically have one database that's clearing all individuals within that building. We're also making upgrades into our AEDs. And then lastly, making a lot of investments in technology under the current capital program. As we've talked to you all about it, prior to the execution of this program, Fulton County was quite behind in how we were executing technology in our classrooms. This is a figure that we've seen as we discussed our SPLOST prior to the vote. We continue to do what we've always done, which is keeping laptops up to date, printers, for new teachers, and the refresh of laptops on a reasonable cycle, on a seven or less year cycle. But we've also been now making investments in the core infrastructure. So we'll talk a minute here about the types of investments we're going to be making in things like mobile learning devices. But all of that requires the infrastructure behind it. So we've been spending a lot of time increasing bandwidth of our schools, so wireless bandwidth within our schools, reliability of the network, and then building up the infrastructure that's there to support any sort of new learning tools in the classroom. I have several initiatives that are going on as we speak. We're rolling out interactive projectors in our classroom. We have about 3,100 that we're rolling out countywide. We have support in place for that. We've put in place digital repositories of educational content so that teachers have more tools to pull from as we're providing additional tools for learning. We've put out a mobile device management, and you might ask, what is that? It's just our way of managing the technology that's being implemented so students are using the information appropriately within their classrooms. And then we're moving ahead with a mobile device. It has yet to be determined. There's an RFP out right now for mobile learning. To put this board at ease, we've had several efforts, both within the Atlanta metro region as well as in other regions, of implementing sort of student device strategies. Cobb had one several years ago that got a little bit of press. If you read the papers, LA's just gone through this. And the big mistake they all make is they lead with the device instead of focusing on what you want to do with the device. And we have really taken that time to look at, and this is our rubric we use, of how we're using that device within our classroom, and are we ready to implement it. So it's more, you got to think about the human element, the staff development that goes in behind it, the resources you're providing it, providing the teachers the infrastructure. And we've tried to take a very deliberate approach, and we're starting to move this forward now, and we're going to see a 3-year rollout of this technology integration within our classrooms. And that's it. I'm sorry. Questions?
Rick?
Just a question. I noticed on Hopewell Middle School, it looks like you're taking a different approach to actually get more permanent space expansion versus doing the portables, which I commend you on that, because that is much better, I think, from a long-term standpoint versus just putting a patch out there. Is that something new you guys are looking at from a footprint expansion?
We have. We've moved to this model of not just looking at, and I know you're familiar with the concept of state capacity. It's sort of the state's way of measuring space, and that does not align well to how we staff our schools. And what we've started to do is move to the model that we use to determine portables and how we determine classroom placement. So the goal really is, you're always going to have portables and variability in enrollment. We're not going to change attendance boundaries every year, nor would I expect the committee would want us to do that. But we are trying to endeavor to get permanent units in the right places.
That's good.
Yes.
Can I take the political question that I think he was asking? Are we going to make our middle schools permanently larger? And is that the long-term plan? No. We needed more middle school space, and we had in the SPLOST that we were planning for additional middle school space. And in the last redistricting, you might have recalled that it was just a little heated. And we heard from folks in that process, and we also heard from folks in the forums the public forums that we had for the charter district. People said, regarding the middle school space, just get the feeder patterns lined up, look at additions and don't look at a new school. And so we heard that so resoundingly from the community that Patrick and his team went back and they said, well, what would happen with our feeder patterns if we looked at additions at these middle schools? And that's why, and it's still controversial. I mean, there's still a group of folks that we have in this community that are like, why did you make the middle school bigger? I think there are some advantages that Patrick and his team have built into this. They've included the community in it, but have we permanently changed the ed specs to have permanently larger middle schools? I'm not sure that that's something that's been determined yet.
Thank you. Bill?
Maybe related to Rick's question on the middle schools too. With the property that you have on Freemanville Road, I know at one time you'd projected putting a high school and a middle school up there. Is there any current plan in the near term within the next 10 years of developing that property?
Not at the moment, although we're already beginning planning for the next capital cycle, so we'll see what comes up from that. But no, that, to Ms. Reeves' point, the idea of putting a middle school up there and dominoing the entire North Fulton area to fill that school was not something that, right, was in the
I'm not going to say anything 10 years down the road because
Right.
that is way long down.
what we
Y'all
have.
have a lot of interest in building new properties.
Correct. And the board has decided we're holding that property we want to be on top of land. We've learned the hard way recently in the city of Roswell, don't get behind on land. So we are keeping that within our inventory, and we anticipate we'll need it within the next 10 years, but we haven't identified the use specifically.
Okay. I have another question. One of the biggest issues out here is our traffic.
Mm-hmm.
You hear it from everybody. And I've noticed over the last 15 years, 16 years that I've been here, morning and evening traffic seems to be lighter during the summer months.
Oh, yes, sir.
I think trying to figure out the correlation between that and maybe the school traffic. Is there anything we can do to that's not what I was going to say. Anything we can do to get kids back riding the school buses? You'll sit around any of these schools during release time, watch the buses come out, and there'll be 5, 6, 7 kids on a bus. Sometimes I've even seen empty buses. It's a huge expense keeping a fleet like that, and all for naught if kids are going to drive to school or their parents are going to drive them to school every day. You don't really have to answer that. I think I figured it out.
It really is a tough question, and it gets back to personal preferences. And in this area, not in all parts of Fulton County. I mean, you go to other parts of Fulton County, you do not see students driving. But up here, they drive, and they drive in large numbers. We do tighten, if it makes you feel any better, we will tighten up the utilization of the fleet after we know for sure what that looks like. I mean, we've got historic patterns in terms of ridership. We would love for people to ride the buses. I know it's not cool. I know it's not cool for a group of kids.
Maybe
So,
you could, remember they had the fur buses and stuff, and you put music and
We'll get some
lights on
dice.
it and all that, snacks, food.
we'll take those ideas back. That's a great idea.
Matt?
As the weather gets cooler, what are the contingency plans for weather events like what we experienced last year?
Yeah, I think we learned some hard lessons last year. Let me say this. We've completely revamped how we make those decisions, so it's a much more detailed process. We're relying very heavily on National Weather Service, and when they come out, when they come up with their updated reports, how often they come up with those updated reports, we're making those contacts directly. I do think we've learned some hard lessons on how to shelter in place if we need to do so. In some ways, it was a good preparation for a very bad event. Not that that wasn't a bad event, but knowing what gaps existed in the process around shelter in place, I think was important. We're actually training principals this month on all the new updated processes because we have some new principles in place. We did unify our bell structure, so I know parents may have complained that their bell time moved for their schools, but now we have elementary, middle, and high all on the same bell time. So what does that do for us? It gives us flexibility on executing early dismissals. So we can do things like flip high school to the first run and executes flawlessly. So we have prepared for that. Every bus driver has a book on early release and late delivery. What does that mean for every single stop they have on their routes? And we'll be training the principals on those as well this month during the principals meeting next Thursday. So it's an excellent question. We take that very seriously.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, but again, we appreciate the update. Can't say enough good things about what the elected board and the staff side have done with our school systems in North Fulton. It's a huge draw here. So
we appreciate it. We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all.
Okay, Sudie, if you don't mind calling our next item. And do we have any public comment?
We do not, sir.
Okay.
Our next item is conservation update. Miss Laurel Florio.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Excuse me, Laurel, if you want to wait just a minute till our school people leave, because those are the ones that attract all the people here. The great schools. I'm kidding.
Well, good evening, everybody. What I thought I'd do tonight is talk about private land conservation in a general sort of way, a little bit of informative educational information on conservation easements and the tools we're going to be hopefully using sooner rather than later in terms of protecting our lovely landscape, but also give you an update on what I've been up to and what we've been doing within the community in terms of enhancing education and working towards some actual conservation on the ground. So tonight we're going to go through and again talk about some conservation specifics to help us in our understanding of how everything works. Talk about the land trusts and the role that they will hopefully be able to play within Milton in preserving the landscape. We're going to talk about the status of conservation to date, balancing expectations and what we can probably foresee going forward. Talk a little bit about some funding sources. Talk about the incentives that exist for landowners and ask that we start to consider other incentives that might be available to landowners to push the program a little bit forward. And then, of course, any conclusions that can be drawn from any of that. So first we talk about the balance of interests. And we know that the whole initiative behind looking at conservation in Milton was to and is to balance the development that's happening in Milton and the conservation of land and landscape that's within the city. So if you remember the conservation green print that was presented to you by Tom Daniels, he showed us that between 300 and 350 acres per year is what is being developed currently. And if we continue in with those numbers per se, then 5,000 acres will be developed over the next 16 years. And I believe that Tom also mentioned that that could even start to exceed what our comprehensive plan originally provided for. So we are moving very, very quickly in a developmental phase right now. So conversely, in conservation, we have to look at what we have so far. And so far, we have some great parks. And we know that if we want to keep pace with the development that is going on, we ought to consider conserving around 5,000 acres over the next 16 years to be equal to the development that's currently going on. Of course, right now, if you want to get a little technical, we're a little bit behind because I wish I could stand here and say in 2014 we were able to conserve 350 acres to be equal with that which is being developed, but that we cannot say that yet. So this is kind of our scenario as we go forward, as we work towards balancing those interests with the current development situation and then the preservation of land that's out there. So as a quick refresher, we remember the green print that Tom presented, and he made some suggestions that I bring up tonight only to refresh our memory and to maybe think about whether or not we will be moving in this direction or not. He suggested a land preservation advisory committee that would be established to assist in making decisions and outlining those areas that could be protected within the city. He thought about the fact that we ought to maybe determine how much acreage we want to protect in a given period of time. So maybe as we go forward, we could say that we take a number and try to aim for a certain number in 2015. If you do the math based on the 5,000 acres a year projected development and or conservation, that's like 32 acres a year, which is totally doable. So maybe if we just do that math specifically, we could take a number and say, okay, in 2015 we want to aim for X acres, maybe 100, maybe 50, whatever, to kind of get the plan rolling, and then maybe then establish a plan going forward that would allow us to have, goals set up to establish the conservation of land as we move along. He suggested the use of all the conservation tools, which we all have heard about many times, the TDRs, the PDRs, the strict donations of conservation easement, the donation of land to a municipality being the city, or the donation of land to a land trust. So there's all sorts of things that are still out there floating, and they're being utilized and learned about. Long-term financing is something that I know I have on my plan to elaborate on, to look into and see what that means for the city as we go forward. Floodplains and stormwater areas, I was just talking to Carter about that tonight, how we've already utilized some of that, and that's a good way to utilize and save those spaces that can't be developed on anyway, and then open them up maybe to public use, or at least to leave them as landscape and buffer in areas like that. The trail system well in hand with the city and how that's coming along, making improvements and then looking to the future. And then, of course, I know we have a committee in place to look at impact fees that may or may not be related to the actual use of conservation and land, depending on what the Georgia statute says about that. So in consideration of the green print, if we look at our staffing, we have the Parks and Rec Department that they know what they're doing. Their acquisition of passive parks, active parks, everything's going well, and the same with the Public Works Department. So if we look at currently what we learned from the conservation green print and what's going on, we're on track with making those improvements and or acknowledging those areas in which we might want to work, continue to work, or enhance our work within that. So how do we do it? How do we then look at the particular needs of the landowners and the particular need to conserve those spaces that are privately held in the city? We know that landowners want to do several things. They may want to develop. They may want to sell the property and just get out from under it. Or they may want to actually outright protect and conserve it. And then we know in the course of conservation, in the business of conservation, that landowners can do all of them, some of them, and they can mix it up. So the landowners have the world at their feet in terms of how they might be able to take and get economic gain from their property and also conserve it as leaving a legacy to the city and also enhancing the public benefit that it provides for everybody else. So some of those options are the development. Now, we all know development. Everybody goes, oh, no, development. Well, development can be full-scale development, big subdivisions, or it can be limited. Landowner can say, I own 4 acres, and I'd like to develop one of those. And then the rest can be protected. So there's obviously, it's not all about development, big bad development, or major development. They're all different sorts of levels of development that can take place. In terms of selling, the landowner we know can sell to a developer. They can sell to a conservation buyer, someone who is not interested in necessarily building up the property, but rather enjoying it as an open space or less of a developed space. There are investors out there that are interested in purchasing lands in order to talk about conservation and then reap the tax benefits. So that does happen out there as well. And then, of course, we know that we know there are people all the time that are calling the city and asking, hey, you want to come look at the property? We want to sell it to you for a park. And, of course, the Parks and Rec Department has a great handle on whether or not that's a viable piece of property or whether or not it isn't. So then in terms of protecting, conserving, and preserving the land, the landowners then also have a slew of options that they can use. They can donate directly the conservation easement value to a land trust for protection, and they can get tax benefits at the federal level, tax credits at the state level. They can sell the development rights in a PDR, purchase of development rights situation. So there's many ways that these that the landowners can choose to work within the scope of their land and reap benefit from it. We know through history, we know through all over the country where this work is very prevalent, that the tax incentives do work, and people do enjoy those tax incentives. And we have found, too, that leaving a legacy to the neighborhood means a lot. And recently I had a landowner that I was working with, and I would say that quite often to him about, oh, wouldn't you want to leave a legacy for your neighborhood? And I think it was sort of that little hook at the end of that little fishing line, and it got him to become a little bit more interested and to hear it. Ultimately, that didn't work out, but that was something that a lot of people feel very strongly about, is leaving a legacy for their neighborhood. And we've seen in different parts of the country where this works greatly. It's about maintaining culture, maintaining the history, and the attachment to place that people so enjoy. So, and also currently, the current use valuation assessments, I think that there was a number in the green print that said there's about 2,300 acres currently under the current use value assessment, which means those properties are temporarily protected from development. And basically, it's a state-enhanced program where there are property tax. The property tax is reduced a little bit for the protection of this property for 10-year periods of time. So I believe there are 30 years, and then every 10 years after that they can renew or not renew. And right now, the folks that do have those in place, that is what they are currently happy doing. But we need to then look at those properties and say, you've come so far, you've already got the CUVA in place, great job, good going. Well, let's enhance that a little bit further. Let's go all the way. Let's do a perpetual easement. Let's do something perpetual so that when you no longer have to worry about renewing it, it's already protected. So, that's another option for the landowners and for those that have them and those that don't have them, and to look into them. So what's the big question? The big question is, what is a conservation easement? And I know that has been thrown around a lot lately, and it's something very, very important to the enhancement of private lands over the long haul. And we know it's a legal agreement. We know it's uniquely drafted for each particular property. Generally, the land trust that's working on the side of protecting the property will establish a template, and from there, the landowner and land trust will negotiate the terms of that contract. It's a partial interest in real property, and this document will run with the land forever, unless, of course, it's judicially extinguished. So once an easement's in place, you have to have a judge nix it. So that is one of the safest and most wonderful tools we have for protection in the long term. And then there are two types of easements, those that qualify through donation for the tax benefits, and those that are intended to just give public benefit and that the landowner has either sold or will reap monetary benefit for it instead. So the rules for the tax incentives for landowners, I might give you that slide, are based on the non-cash charitable donations under the IRS code. Now, don't glaze over. We're not going to go into all that, so it won't be too boring. But basically, we just know that the donations of easements give a federal tax deduction, as I've mentioned, as well as potentially a state tax credit for the folks within Georgia. And then, of course, there's bargain sale opportunities where a landowner might say, well, I'll donate part of it, but then the other half I want to sell, or I want to somehow, again, take all those options that I have as landowner and make them work for me and put them in and make a little basket from which I can get the most out of my property. Now, right now, we all know we came off an election. And so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be watching carefully to see how the Senate takes care of the enhanced conservation easement incentive. It was in place from 2006 to 2013. It was the best tax incentive for landowners to date in terms of conservation. But of course, we've flipped back to the old rule, which is 30% of income carry over for 6 years. Whereas the new rule, which we'd hope that in the next 4 weeks they will renew, was a 50% deduction for their income up to 100%. So you can see that these tax incentives were extremely successful, so much so it was enhanced. They backed off that, and we hope that maybe the folks in Washington will rethink it and renew it going forward. The state tax incentives, in Georgia, it's a tough one. As you can see from the slide, there's several states around the country that have state tax credit situations where the landowner gets tax credits, and then sometimes they're transferable, like they are in South Carolina and Georgia, where they can then sell them for money, and somebody else can take advantage of it. The issue with the Georgia state tax credit is right now it's going through a little bit of a growth pain because the new regulations that were established about a year ago put a upfront fee of $5,000 on the landowner to even apply for the state tax credit, and that's non-refundable money. So you can guess that not a lot of landowners are running downtown to stand in line to get a tax credit because it's just too questionable whether or not it will work for them at a cost of $5,000 up front. So that is something that is out there but has not been really extremely successful in Georgia so far. And then, of course, we know there's local tax incentives, reduction in property tax rates and things when you do encumber your property, give up the development rights and protect it. So it differs from town to town, but generally Florida right now has the very best. But right now Georgia does have some on the books that allows for it in Fulton County anyway. So estate tax incentives are something that not a lot of people are really very much aware of either, and that is the permanent estate tax relief that can be wrought by people who do protect their property. Their property is put into a conservation easement, and then, of course, it's reduced in value and therefore net positively affects the estate tax that the family would end up having to pay at a given time in the future. So the property being restricted, the estate tax incentive allows for $5 million per individual. That we also have something really, which I think is totally special, is called the postmortem deduction. And this is a situation that is very important to at least know and keep in the back of our minds is in the event that landowner would ever come forward and say, oh my gosh, Dad has died, and before he died he said, I would very much like to protect this property, but he never got around to it. Well, landowners, so long as they can show that they've owned the property for 3 years, and of course they have to prove their relationship to Dad, they can ask to put a conservation easement post-mortem on that property, which means they will reap all of the tax benefits and the estate tax relief that would have been available to Dad when he was alive. So that's a really, really good option that not a lot of people know is available out there. And it really does change the potential for landowner to reap benefit after having lost someone who owned the property. So it's not an easy kind of donation. You see on the screen it says de minimis commercial recreational use. They can't, the heirs wouldn't be able to open it to the public and have all sorts of stuff going on the property, but they certainly could protect it and reap the tax benefits that would be allowed in order to meet the 2031 exclusions that are available. So we won't need to be repetitive. Okay, so some of the state laws that may apply to conservation easements. We know that there's an enabling statute in Georgia. Every state pretty much has adopted the Uniform Conservation Easement Act of 1981, and from that act they developed their own enabling statutes. Certainly Georgia has one as well. Contract laws apply because conservation easements are a contract between the landowner and the land trust holding the property. There might be real property laws. There's deed situations and conventions. Marketable Title Act, another piece of law that is very important to know. All of these things, the only reason I bring them up is to remind us of the sort of complexity involved in some of these transactions. Take your average house closing that we all know, and we've all been through many times. You add on even more steps and more documents and more things that have to be done within one of these transactions to give you an idea of how legally we have to be sure all the documents add up. So the fee simple donation of land, again, when someone comes forward and would like to donate to the municipality or donate even to a land trust, we know that there are incentives for the landowner to allow them to do that. Non-cash charitable donations and donations equal deductions. So we're very much aware of the fact that even without conserving the property, the donation of land will then reap benefits in that way. The bargain sale of land or a conservation easement is merely selling that land for less than the appraised value. And that's where landowner would walk away with tax deductions for the donation portion of it as well as cash in hand for having sold it at a less rate. So again, just a reminder and an informational look at the different incentives that do exist for landowners that we as a group need to start being aware of and be able to communicate to more and more landowners as we go along. Other little incentives that exist, donations with lifetime income, Purchase of development rights I've already mentioned, and transfer of development rights, though I know we're familiar with. So, again, many, many options that allow landowners to look at what they might want to do with their property besides just sell it outright to a developer or someone else. So we look at landowners' needs and wants. Landowner always has those in hand. And we know that upfront is always money because a lot of things always revolve around money. And landowner is entitled to get the most that they can out of their property. So we know that money is an incentive, the tax deduction and credits, maybe limited development is an incentive to some, and leaving a legacy. And then, of course, although it's at the bottom of the list, it's our primary concern, which is protecting those properties for the public benefit. And we can accommodate the landowner's needs and desires working within the realm of conservation and helping them figure out what's best for them. So after we've looked at and talked to some landowners and found out what is it that they actually want, then we can start moving in a way that will allow the transactions to start taking place. Accredited land trusts are important parties to these transactions, and the procedures that the land trusts use in establishing the process of the documentation and the flow of the deal, if you will, running the numbers with the landowners. All of these things require expertise for the landowners. So landowners right up front know that they need to have their CPA involved, they need to have their attorney involved, and so it's laying that foundation for the landowners too. There are costs to doing business, and there are costs to doing conservation business. So that is a reality that I know that I've been finding with some landowners, that some know it up front, some understand it, and some are kind of shocked to find out that it will cost them X to possibly reap those benefits in terms of tax benefit, tax credit, tax deduction, or money in hand. So that's the reality of the business aspect of it. Now, I've talked a lot about the role of the land trust and what that means, and basically we know that the City of Milton, is acting as a facilitator to hopefully partner landowners with the land trust in order to accomplish conservation and accomplish that on the ground out there in the city. So the land trust has very, very important role that they play perpetually. The land trusts have, assuming they are accredited or working towards accreditation, they have to live and work by the standards and practices established by the Land Trust Alliance out of Washington. And this is basically just the best standard of practice in terms of doing business. It's no different than any other business. They have rules and regs they have to follow. And so they have to establish the parameters of the transaction and then go through all the way up through stewardship and perpetuity. So these land trusts, then the reason they need to be accredited is to ensure that they will last over the long, long term. They have to take care of at least monitoring properties annually in order to ensure that the rights and restrictions of the conservation easement are in place. Meaning, whatever we said we were going to protect is being protected. Whatever development rights were on the property have been extinguished, sold, or otherwise negated so that there is no development on the property other than what's allowed. So it is very important that the role that the land trust will fill within the realm of these transactions, and they will become a permanent presence, hopefully, within the community, because the established relationship between the land trust and landowner is for a long, long time. So hopefully we'll see that will build partnerships and enhance them, and that also helps building the neighborhood and leaving of legacy as this all develops and goes on. So what are the potentially available land trusts that may be available to help us in Milton? Well, the Georgia Land Trust has already expressed interest in working within the City of Milton. There is a smaller land trust out of Marietta called the Southeastern Trust for Parks and Land. That is a little bit different land trust, very small, but definitely works within the realm of parks and parksland, and so therefore is in the business of acquiring land to be used for the public. And so that, in some way, is something we are going to look at, because wouldn't that be awesome if we had an opportunity to have other parklands used by the public that maybe weren't necessarily under the liability of the city? So there's all sorts of different options that might be with this kind of a land trust. The Southern Conservation Trust is also a land trust out of south of the city of Atlanta. They are very versed in working with preserves and other public access properties. We have to remember, too, that conservation on private land does not mean it has to be open to public access. Okay, so these land trusts give us two wings that are important. They're used to working with lands that are open to the public, and they're used to working with lands that aren't, because there's never an expectation that protecting one's property means they have to open it to the public. Georgia Piedmont Land Trust, another smaller trust out of, where is it? It's out of Sewanee, I think? I forget. Anyway, Athens Land Trust over by UGA. So all of these land trusts I've known them for years. I've known the players for a long time, and I've been in conversations with them, and their interest in being part of seeing Milton protected is great. So that gives us a lot of options, because remember, conservation is a business, and these land trusts are in the business of also providing deals for us. And so we may come to the point where we have land trusts, kind of competing with one another to give us the best deal in terms of the costs associated with doing a transaction. And that's not bad. That's a winner for the land trust, for the landowner, though. Absolutely winner for the landowner to have that choice to make. So what's going on today? What have I been doing? I have had 7 properties of interest, meaning 7 properties that are in some way, shape, or form worthy of some sort of protection. Unfortunately, one was sold to a developer recently, and cried in my pillow over that one. But nonetheless, the landowner has done what he wishes to do, and that is his right to do that. Another was a donation, an outright donation, a lot of acreage. The family has decided to step back for right now. They have CUVAs in place on the property, and they're not in a position to go forward with the donation. So that, to me, is not lost. Of all the years I've been doing this, there's been times where 5 years go by and landowners finally come up and sign papers. So this is laying the foundation, and we are laying the foundation with all the landowners, and we are starting to set precedent where we might want to do the work and where the people will be willing to help us do the work. And then that will just have an electric effect, and it will be a positive for everybody. There is one farm within the city that I'm working with through the NRCS to work within the ALE program. The ALE program is a conservation easement program related to production on farmland. So this farm produces something, and regardless of the scope that it produces, it could qualify for special tax benefits under this program, and also give the landowner cash in hand for being part of the program. So that's something that I'm working with one landowner on, see how that goes, and then of course that will set precedent for maybe other landowners who might be interested in that kind of thing. And then another one that I'm working with wants to sell the property outright. So that's a challenge, but it can happen. There are land trusts, some of the ones on our list, that are interested in purchasing properties. So we're going to see how that goes, and we're going to keep plugging along to see that if we can make a transaction happen where conservation is the winner overall. So what does this entail when I talk about these 7 properties and, what's been going on? Well, a lot of time on the phone, a lot of site visits, a lot of discussions with land trust and communication with land trust. This is the nature of this business. The nature of the business is that it's establishing partnership. And we all know that landowners' land is one of their biggest assets. And no one has the right to go in and strong arm a landowner to do what they want with it against their will. So by laying the foundation and explaining and educating all of this, it takes a lot of time, but at least it is enhancing the knowledge out there within our landowners as to what options they have. And out of those 7 properties, we may very well find that half of them do come forward in a year or two and wish to actually participate in conservation. And they could also come forward even quicker than that. We don't know. So all the time put in is just allowing the landowners to be able to make their decisions accordingly. And what I feel that is important that I try to do is give them the very clearest picture of all their options that exist for them and what they might look at going forward. Then it's, of course, up to them to sit with their CPA and run numbers and really look at the financial aspects of what it means for them. Okay. So currently I have an additional 8 landowners that are on my call list, and some of them I have already spoken to, some of them have called me, some of them I have called myself based on location of property. So I'm in the process of discussing with them. I try to, and what I've been trying to really do, and it hasn't come to fruition yet, but I believe it will, is trying to have like neighborhood meetings where instead of my spending time talking to one landowner, I could maybe sit and talk with 3 or 4 at a time. So hopefully that will come to be in the near future. I feel like the phone calls are increasing a lot. Maybe there's more interest in what's going on. And I think, too, that when neighborhoods feel pressured with the development is when I get the big calls. And that's when I get the what's going on, what does this mean, and why. And so that is definitely my door to open and go in and talk with them and say, okay, well, let's see what's going on. What does it mean for you? What can you do about it? And then what do you want to do with your own property? So site visits, out of these 8, if I've spoken to them and think that a site visit is warranted, then I do go to the house and I do see the property, and then I know whether or not I start filling out paperwork. Like the 7 of the other ones, I had to fill out paperwork for the land trust and do all that. That's done. But these, I don't make that assumption until I've seen the property, because I know exactly whether or not it would pass muster from the land trust perspective. So we've got those 8, and so who knows, we might have the opportunity to get something done on the ground between all of those 15 individuals so far. So what do I mean by balancing of expectations? Well, let's just face it. We know that we have a high development of demand right now. And we know that it is very difficult to balance the interests of conservation and development. As a facilitator for these transactions, the best that we can do is put together the landowner and the land trust and seek that and hope that they make a partnership and then come up with the best option for the landowner and protect the property. But all that relies on landowner willingness. When landowner called me and said, well, instead of giving my donation this year, I've decided the family and I are going to wait. I mean, we're not going to do, I'm a little disappointed, but I understand. That's okay. I'm here when you need me. We'd like to talk to you whenever you're ready. So, again, we have to look at, where we're working, where these properties are, and then kind of look around. And I go by what the people tell me are areas of concern. I look at the green print. I look at our comp plan and look at those areas that need attention from a conservation standpoint, and hope that at some point soon somebody will come forward and say, okay, I'm going to give it a whirl. I'm going to do it. The prioritization of land areas, if it comes to the point where we think that we need to establish priorities and then work within certain areas, then so be it. But right now it's basically kind of working within areas that I get calls about or that I know are precious and need to be looked at and maybe proactively discussed. So we'll see how that keeps going. So why am I talking to you guys today? The biggest hurdles for the landowners are in the examination of their options are the due diligence costs associated with the transactions. When I say to a landowner that one of the best ways to start the process is to put up $7,500 to $18,000 for a qualified appraisal, let me guess how many say, oh, yeah, sure, let me get my checkbook. It doesn't really happen that way. So we have landowners who are just about ready to cross that line to say, yeah, I think I really want to run my numbers, really want to do it. But that cost is daunting. I mean, let's face it, it would be for anyone. But these appraisals are not your average appraisal. They're appraisal based on highest and best use, and then based on the restrictions that they will put into their easement, and then they do the difference between the two values, and then you have the conservation easement value. So that's a very, very, very complicated appraisal that only so many people are even qualified to do within our immediate area. So another cost that's associated with the transactions that, again, landowner generally might pick up, or depending on the land trust, they may work it into their costs and pick it up, is a baseline documentation report. This report is done by like a biologist or ecologist or someone who usually works for the land trust or they hire. And they go through and quantify the conservation value on the property so that we know what we're protecting based on land trust perspective. So it's going to be, timber stands, it's going to be springs, it's going to be open land, it's going to be, rivers, riparian areas, all the natural valuations that are necessary because the IRS requires this document along with the easement document. And so whether or not we're going for tax deductions or tax credits, the fact is that has to be met to meet the IRS code, and that document has to be done, and that's between $4,000 and $5,000. So again, another huge cost for landowner that is right now kind of prohibitive then moving forward. Of course, title opinion, let's just say it's $1,000. It's maybe not that much in a lot of cases, but some of the other due diligence costs. So these add up. When we talk about landowner being ready to take that step, the hurdle they hit is all the costs. And they just, and then of course the stewardship fee. The stewardship fee is a fee that is paid by landowner to land trust to perpetually protect the property. So they take this chunk of money, they put it in their perpetual fund, and it garners interest, and they are able to send someone out to the property, A, to monitor once a year, and B, to deal with any kind of violations should they occur. And in addition to that, they also have a fund that they have which takes care of defense, because the land trust would have to police and take the landowner to task in the event that any violations occurred. That's really the biggest role that they play as steward. So what kind of funding sources then are there? Well, I know you're going to hate the first one, but it's city coffers, city money. Are dedicated funds from the city. The ability of the city or the desire of the city to maybe front some costs or work with landowners to incentivize them to be part of the program. Impact fees, we're not sure how that would play in. TDR Bank, we're not in a position right now to do that, but that's something that has been successfully done in other places. The farm protection programs certainly provide money or provide funding to incentivize landowners and help them through. I'll be very frank, the problem with some of the programs that are available is our socioeconomic Milton area. I don't think Conservation Fund or anyone thinks about, we got to go to Milton, they need money. So the problem we have to have now is to entice those funding sources to come to Milton to help us with the landowners who would really enjoy the incentive that would be part of funds and money coming from someplace else. And the Land Conservation Loan Program is certainly a program that tends to come up with much money for big, big projects. But we do have some landowners that have incredible acreage. So, again, things we're looking at and trying to make sense of and see if it would be possibilities for us. But we need to think about how we might incentivize landowners from a cost perspective, because right now that's the biggest hurdle that they're facing. So I'm going to skip ahead one. So the bottom line then is right now we're the facilitator of getting partnerships between land trusts and landowners. Landowners have all the power. And so what we are trying to do is instill that legacy, that pride of place, and encouraging landowners to come forward to be part of it and help us to do what we as a city council, as a city, has decided to do, which is balance the development and the conservation. So what I'm going to ask going forward is that tonight to just lay sort of lay some little seedlings about some things that we can think about and some things that might be important to discuss at a future time or discuss tonight, whatever you want to do, in regards to incentives from us to the landowners to assist them. That's really it. And I would love to take any questions or comments going forward.
First comment, and I'll open up. You went over some of the numbers of properties or individuals you've talked with, and obviously I'm sure it's kind of a little disheartening. You get some that are kind of interested, but like you say,
it's the nature of the beast, though. It's the way it goes, yeah.
I'm going to assume once, it's like anything else, it may be slow going at first, but once you get the first person in and then the next landowner and all that, it will probably start exponentially growing. Is that what you would?
That's what we've seen in other parts of the country. It's all about, like, I'll never forget in South Carolina, down the Ace Basin in that area, two landowners started, and then it was like this chain reaction that was so out of control. It was wonderful, but it was all about, wow, look what Mary did, and oh my gosh, look at the benefits she got, and she's keep those wonderful oak trees with the Spanish moss. They'll never be destroyed. And then it was electric effect, and I know that would happen here in the event that we got those little starters.
Okay. Questions or comments?
So who are those starters?
I'm not going to name any names.
I'm not being funny, okay?
Who are they?
Yeah, because programs like this, I mean, think about it. We've got a goal to set aside or get 5,000 acres into this program over a certain period of time, right? We know who the landowners are. We know where the property is, okay? So there's some kind of a process, some kind of a call to action that we should be promoting right now in order to get those property owners to wake up one day and say, you know what, I really need to look into this. All right? I know you're doing the journeyman's work, you're carrying all the water right now in terms of trying to get that out. And we actually shouldn't be letting you do that. In other words, we're not going to succeed if we don't really get an engine revved up behind this.
Right.
And so in terms of, Laurel getting up every day and trying to find all the property owners and calling them and doing that kind of thing, that's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. And in my mind, I would think at this point we would have already identified the short list of property owners, and maybe it's the 7 that you've talked to that haven't gone anywhere, maybe it's the 8 that you've got on the list to call next. But I would have thought we already had identified those people who had shown enough interest or we thought could be convinced that this is a program they need to participate in. And so when I ask who the first couple of success stories are,
There are
who
some
they?
that are right here. They are part of that 7. They are part of the 8. And so I guess part of what the discussion tonight was aiming to do was to have us start thinking about what we could do to enhance their desire to be part of it.
So
Can
as a-
we do anything, and what is that we can do?
So as a follow-up to that, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No, you go. I'm good. Go.
There's 2 things that we need. First of all, you called the conservation easement a tool. And I really don't see that as a tool. And the reason I even say that right this second is because I want to say something about tools. We do need a tool. And the tool that we need is the thing that's going to help us identify and track the process that we're moving some of these landowners through. Okay?
Yep.
I'm just guessing that in order to achieve a number of 5,000 acres in conservation easements, we need to identify and talk to 50,000 acres worth of landowners. I don't know how many that is. It could be 3, it could be 100. I don't know what it is.
It's a lot.
But the conversion rate to get from some big number down to what we want is going to be extreme in this case. All right. So what defines this process? There's well-established tools that can help us work this problem and manage the communication, the collateral material that we need to drill or deliver to these folks, the education. I mean, right now you're doing this on it sounds like a door by door, knocking and talking to anybody who'll listen kind of a basis. And we got to be a lot more efficient than that. Otherwise, it's going to be 30 years before we achieve whatever goal we've set for ourselves.
Yeah.
And at some point in time, the door is going to close because we're going to lose the option for the land that we had an opportunity to convert, and it's going to be gone, and we won't have that opportunity again. So,
Right.
so we need tools. I would agree with you 100%. What tools do we need?
Right. Well, and I think it's the money. It's,
We need collateral material. What kind of collateral material do we need? So there's, and believe me, I got about 3 pages worth of notes where I sort of thought about those questions. I don't want to slow down the meeting tonight, but I do want to get with you later on.
I'd
and
love
talk
to,
about that.
absolutely.
Okay.
And that's what I mean by planting a seed, is because if I'm seeing most of the hesitancy is over money, which of course it would be, and of course it is, and whatever, and because there isn't already precedent set within the community, no one else has done it yet, that's the hurdle we have to get over.
Well, and
So-
you do bring up a good question, and this is one of the things I wrote down. In your experience, or drawing on the best practices of other communities that have gone through this process, do we have an idea for what the costs to succeed are in terms of dollars per acre? In other words, do you think it's realistic for us to achieve our goal by spending $10 an acre on the program, $100 an acre, $1,000 an acre? What is the number that you think we need to achieve success? All right, that should be something that we can get an answer to pretty
Oh, I
easily.
can, yes, absolutely. Because I don't think of it in terms of per acres. I think of it in terms of, I look at the due diligence cost as the biggest and most compounded, easily determinable number. And we could divide that out to figure out what it is per
and
acre.
I'm
but
thinking of all the costs
Yeah.
associated with this, not
Yeah.
just the legal work
upfront
that
legal
needs to be
work and all that.
done.
I gotcha. That can be done. It could be really daunting too, though, Sue. So,
Well,
it
and
could
I think
be.
we need to know what that is.
Yeah, we do.
because
Yeah.
Let's just pretend for a second it's $1,000 an acre. We're talking about a $5 million program. Is that what we really thought of when we approved this?
Well,
I don't know.
Well, if we look at what the projection was in our green print plan, there was a figure of 25 million. Now, that is a projection based on, I think, capping easements at 10,000 per acre, which is not really realistic, and also other factors that I'm not really sure how he came up with that figure. But the fact is that I think it is talking about, depending on what role the city wants to play in this money or how we want to work to get the money, it is a bigger figure than we probably initially thought about.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about the cost for land or anything
right.
like that. I'm just talking about the program cost to get 5,000 acres into a conservation easement. So,
Yep.
borne by the city.
We will talk.
Good point, Joe. Rick?
I guess kind of branch off from what Joe had said. When you look at best practices, you look where it's been successful. Do you see the municipalities actually anting up and putting money into this program in order to get the process rolling? I know ultimately the landowner has to make the decision based upon all the complexities. But what do you see is when you look at success in the past, how did it get started? What did those cities do?
Well, it really depends on where you're talking about and the climate. We're coming post-recession again, too, so that's part of the factor. But I have seen where we have two things. We have municipalities deciding that it's important enough that they're going to ante up X dollars, and they're going to work it within a program that once that dollar is used, then that's it for the time being. For example, we could come forward as a city and say, okay, landowners, if you close a conservation deal, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, if you close a conservation deal by 2015, December 2015, we will reimburse your appraisal costs. So the onus is on the landowner to pay for those up front, but then to enhance the program, we will reimburse you. If you've closed the deal, it's on record, everything's good, we'll reimburse you. Some cities have done that route. Other cities jump right to tax, SPLOST, all those other things that I don't think is really something we can be thinking about right now based on the other things that are going on in the city. And based on what I always hear from every landowner, which is, you're not going to take taxes for this, are you? So, again, we've got the interest to do the conservation, but not yet the willingness to allow tax dollars to be spent on it. So, I hope I'm answering your question. So then in other situations, we have neighborhoods that are strictly donative and public benefit, and they just want to donate. And they're very wealthy landowners. Again, I use South Carolina as the best example. They're leaving their legacy. They're leaving their pride of place, the culture of South Carolina, and they get together and decide, okay, we're all going to donate an easement to whatever land trust. So it really, it can be done in all those different ways, and it has been done in all those different ways. Here, what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling is that we just need to get somebody to take that plunge, and maybe it would be in our best interest to think about how we can enhance that from the city's level. You know, again, some sort of program, short-term or something, just to get people on the bandwagon.
I guess that's something I would be interested in hearing, not at this meeting, but come back with, here's really concrete steps we could take to actually move us closer, or come forward to the council to say, this is what it would take, or here's an option, here's how it could work. I'm trying to wrap my head around the process. What are all the steps in the process? And it's not a simple, oh, you do one thing and it all falls in place. It looks like there's a lot of different parts in there.
Yeah, there are, and that's a document, too, that I've been working on, which is basically a procedural document, and it would show like a flow chart of how things come into place. You do diligence, you're this, when does this happen? You know, negotiating with the land trust landowner to go over here and negotiate and blah, blah, blah. So and that's easy.
Who does what in each of those steps?
Exactly.
What's the landowner? And then you've laid out some of the cost here, so that would be interesting to see. As you talk to landowners, and as you tell us from a cost standpoint what you think may be recommended, that would be interesting to see how does this flow down.
And I think, to my first point, piggybacking on the last couple of comments, as you said, once you get, the first couple going, then people want to get on the bandwagon. So we may have to pony up, for lack of a better term, with the city some funds to give some incentives to make some deals happen.
Well, and it also, I think, from a public perception standpoint too, is that that we are this serious about it, that we're willing to, proceed with and help you find the reasons to do it. I've seen in different communities where land trusts or organizations have been successful in raising money and then taking that step. And, we do have Preserve Rural Milton, and maybe that's a job for them, is to help with starting to raise the money and put together the funds to assist. But I think, too, that it says a lot when the municipalities do come up and come forward and say, hey, okay, we've decided we're going to put in X, and this is the agreement we're going to make, and this is how it's going to work. You either take advantage or you don't. And, of course, that's a lot for discussion, and, but that's a perception of, okay, we're that serious about it. Come on. We need you to help now. We need you as landowners to step up. We're willing to support.
See, and I guess that's where I'd like to see from recommendation and tying to what Joe had said.
The figures. And
okay, here's what it's going to cost. Really, what's a suggestion on how those funds could be used? Or, you landowner, we've got interest, but if you do consummate this deal, here's what the city will put into it. Mm-hmm. And then we know up front what those costs are going to be, so we could actually budget for that. And
that's
say,
right.
We're behind that.
It would be very easy to work out those figures, because then you would, the parameters with which you would be willing to participate, and then how that would flow through an agreement. And, until that stuff is on record, landowner, you don't get anything back, that kind of thing. So the onus is still on them to fulfill the responsibilities of doing the deal. Right. So just one of the ideas. But I think it's a good place to start talking about this, though, because I think that's where we're really right now, we're hitting that hurdle of it's about the money, and we just need a little something to shove everybody over the line. So,
do you think, and with our TDR program, do you ever see us, as opposed to having a willing buyer going out looking for a seller, but is the city or some other entity buying TDRs, and maybe that's the PDR, purchasing and holding them? Do you foresee us getting into that?
Well, the land trust would be the ones, because, let's put it this way. It's always been my understanding that the city wasn't interested in forming a land trust. They have quasi-governmental land trusts that are run by municipalities, because that's a whole business in and of itself, really. You need to staff it, you need to have it, there it is. So these land trusts are in the position to purchase those development rights and hold them and extinguish them. And that's some of the mission that they do. Georgia Land Trust is in a position to do that. They have a lot of money.
Then that's who a developer would go to if they wanted to.
Well, not through a TDR program. No, this is strictly through conservation easements. But if what you're talking about through the TDR program, that would be more of establishing of a bank type of thing, I believe. And that's not something that I think our ordinance allows right now, but I know that, Ken has been asked to look at that too, and that could be a possibility down the line. It's just not something that's feasible right now.
So there are not other entities that do that. We would need to take that under our umbrella.
Generally, you'd have to establish a 501c3, because under Georgia law, it's kind of complicated. But it has happened in Georgia.
But that's a way we could potentially look at conserving some things that, dare I say, pennies on the dollar versus going out and buying properties and this, that, or the other.
But there is, many organizations, Conservation Fund and the Land Trust, that they even skip. They don't even do TDRs. They just purchase the development rights, purchase the easements outright, and done.
That's done.
So again, we have a basket full of stuff, and it's a matter of pulling out what works for somebody.
Bill?
Hey, Laurel.
Hello, Bill.
You touched upon it. Rick brought up the issue, too. As with anything, and particularly new program like this, the issue is educating people. And that was my friend up on Thompson Road that you were talking about. I think a lot of these elderly folks out there that have endeared themselves to their property for decades don't want to get involved in some legal mumbo-jumbo snake oil presentation like this.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Well, not yours.
I'm teasing. Go ahead.
A perceived snake oil presentation. But I think it's all in the sales part of it, and trying to inform these people that they have some real life options out there that are actually going to benefit them too. And I know you've perfected this process here, but I'm speaking from my experience with a couple of these landowners out there, and they're mystified. I guess it's particularly if you hand them something like this.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like they're being confronted by an insurance salesman or a used car salesman. And I'd just like to see your program or your sales program and making it as simple as possible, understandable to particularly these older landowners out here that are really cynical and skeptical. And but once you do get your first one, I think we need to make every effort to make that one party an advocate for the whole system.
Absolutely.
And just build upon that.
Like a celebration, yeah. I find with the landowners, especially the older folks, I don't bring anything with me except my camera because I need to take pictures for the sake of the documentation that I need to go forward, assuming they want to go forward. And we just have a conversation, and we talk about it. And that's because that's the last thing I want to do is hand them this stuff because it's dry, it's impersonal, it's mumbo-jumbo, and it doesn't do anything. And I mean, with your friend, by the second visit, I was riding around in his gator. We were having a great time. Oh, yeah. So we were getting there. I could feel it was going to. But, I also knew I was up against the fact that he had been talking to the developer for a very long time. So I was just grateful to him to allow me that time with him to just give me that glimpse. I mean, 2 visits where he could have said no initially, and yet he allowed that. So he was very gracious that way, even though he had been talking to the developer for a very long time. So.
The other point that Joe was talking about, too, is expanding our base out there. And it's all a matter of probability and statistics. You increase the number of your possibilities out there, knowing that you're only going to pull in a small percentage of those that are actually going to work. Are we looking at the current conservation property owners out here? Is that the base that we're looking at?
The ones that have the CUVA?
Right.
They're part of the, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're the ones that are more savvy than others about any options at all. And then there are others that know nothing about options. They think either I can sell it to the city or I can sell it to developer, but that's all I can do. So, it's been a very interesting conversation. But I think what I'd love, the assistance with is coming to the neighborhoods and putting together. No one's going to come here. We know that. We know that a meeting at 7:30 at night is not going to draw everybody. But maybe, if we put together meetings and I've worked with other folks who are very supportive that, if we put together meetings in little neighborhoods where pop in and, talk about stuff for half an hour and, start planting seeds that way too. So far we haven't really done one, but it's getting there. And I'm also very, conservative with my time. I don't just throw the time away, and I try to put it towards accomplishing something, that will also get us where we need to go. I don't think that my sole purpose is to be just on the land with the landowners, you know what I mean? There's other stuff in the background, working through procedures and things that we're doing too that are very, very important.
One of the points that you brought up early in your presentation, the objectives of the Green Print Plan, you called for Land Preservation Advisory Committee. How critical do you think it is at this time to form a committee like that? And do you think it would be effective?
I think it's hard to say. Part of me wants to say, oh my gosh, yes, put together a committee, they're always good. And then the other part of me says, do we have, would it work? Would it be, it would have to be established with particular goals in mind.
Absolutely.
And it would have to be very, it would just really be goal-oriented in terms of, okay, what are the best places for conservation to take place? Do you agree? Where do you think those places are? and then, go with them. So I wish I could stand here and say, absolutely put a committee together. I wish I could say that, because I think the more people involved is what we need. I just don't know if that's the right way to go about it now. I don't know. I think that it is something that we should examine and we shouldn't pass off quickly. It's a matter of, whether or not it's the right time. It could be, because it would allow us to stipulate where we want to do the work. But I also look over here and say, well, I'm still dealing with the hurdles the landowners are facing. So regardless of whether or not we have a committee, we still don't have anybody coming up and saying they're going to protect. Right. And that's what we got to do. So I apologize, I can't be definitive on that, but...
Well, and I understand, too, and I think that would be another educational process, bringing a group of citizens together, training them as to the whole program, understanding what we're trying to do, and I could see that taking up a lot of your time.
Well, but that's time well spent, though, if we did use that tool and put that committee together to then go out and be able to educate. That's a perfect use of that committee. And then to guide and say, okay, well, now this committee has talked to all these landowners over here, well, then that's where the focus should be. So, that spin on it, Bill, makes a lot of more sense to me than people sitting around a room and going, well, I think we should protect Bethany. No, I think we should protect Freemanville. You see what I mean? That makes sense, to put together a group of people who would become highly knowledgeable of what's going on and then be able to spread that knowledge. That would be ideal.
Well, I think if we were to go in that direction, it should be a highly selective process, bringing members of that committee together.
They do exist. I'm sure we have them. They exist.
But
I think that role would be ideal in terms of spreading the education and everything.
Well, and I look at the different boards and committees we have in the city here, too. And there are a lot of dedicated people that are members of those boards, and some are more knowledgeable than others. And I guess my point is, I think particularly in this committee, you need highly qualified, highly motivated people to actually haul the water and get the work done.
And that would be an ideal use of that committee. So I'm kind of standing here changing my mind. That could really work really well. I know that in Pennsylvania, Tom was telling me that they put together a group of municipality-related individuals and then landowners, and they come up with a very large, which in this case it wouldn't be as large, I don't think, but because it's a very large, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. But they come up with a large group of people that eventually did get to that point where they worked so well with one another, they were functioning highly and doing a lot of the work that would normally be left to a land trust and everything. And over time, it developed really, really well. And I mean, I have faith that that could work here too. So that's a good. I like that short term, not short term, but I like that spin on the goals of that committee, which is different than what he suggested in the book, but it would give it more of an educational base to spread the word. So I like that.
Yeah. Well, my experience with a lot of these committees, you get just a few highly motivated and folks that really drive the whole process there, and then you get some other folks there that are just kind of riding along. But we've got some highly motivated committee members out
yes,
here
we do.
tonight.
And that would be awesome to have that energy.
Yeah.
It would be absolutely awesome. Because a lot of, the roles of the land trust is usually to do that, to be the engine behind it. But I don't foresee that any of the land trusts have the capacity to kind of drop what they're doing, where they're doing it in other places and come here and do that. So that committee could be that engine.
Let me kind of bring it around, too, and kind of poll the council. I mean, obviously, we've invested money thus far and working forward. And both with, motivated committees and people and all that, but also, money talks too. And I'll just throw out a high number, but, is the council interested? We've spent X number of dollars so far. And Laura, I'll just throw this out to you, and maybe our staff can be looking at it. But, just for discussion, I'll throw out, would the council be willing to to earmark, additional monies to get some of these started, say, $20,000 or whatever, to pay for appraisals and some of this upfront fee to maybe get a few of these started. And Laurel, would that help if we could commit some money to, and again, you may have to think about it and look at it and get together with staff, but see what it might take. And the question was already starting to come out, but.
Oh, I think we would definitely have to look at the legal ramifications and all that, but certainly I think that would be an excellent way to incentivize landowners to get on board.
And it'd have to be one of those where, like you say, you incentivize them and maybe pay for some fees and things like that. If they close, and everybody just has to realize that wouldn't last forever. That would just to get a few started, and then obviously everybody else could see the benefits or whatever. So, I mean, as a council.
Well, just from my perspective, just to follow up on that, I mean, to the extent that the council, I mean, again, I know you're not looking for a vote, I understand that, but that's where you might want to see just a policy put together that contains some specifics, perhaps the amount of acreage that's implicated before we would pay those costs, when they might be available, in other words, at the closing, because that's going to give Laurel a nice blueprint when she's going out and talking with these people as far as what are the parameters of when we might be willing to throw in some costs.
Yeah, so Joe and Ken and Laurel, I had thought about that earlier. Is this just a problem of putting the money in the right place? And the reason I kept coming back to that doesn't make any sense right now is because to me, it would seem like if we don't understand what the benefits, the tax benefits are to a potential donator of land, and if we can't put together a presentation that says, hey, if the land gets evaluated at this level, here's what happens for you, and convince them, then perhaps maybe we could get to a point where we engage with the landowner and say, hey, look, would you sign a letter of intent that if the appraisal comes in at a certain level and your accounting and economic needs are met, that you'll proceed with the program? Because if they'll do that, then we could step up to the plate and say, yeah, we'll pay for the appraisal if we have a good feeling that the appraisal is going to come in where we think it is. But the real question is, does a letter of intent have enough binding authority to tie the landowner into the process if we take those steps?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, that's a memorandum of intent, a letter of intent, whatever. It's going to be a contract that's got a future contingency in it. So basically, it's some sort of a private agreement or agreement with the city that says, if we fund this and it meets this benchmark, you agree to do this. I mean, that's something I would want to talk about with Laurel with respect to what makes her job easier, candidly. I mean,
well, at least that way we don't.
But is it doable? Sure.
We don't have to throw money at things we don't think. I mean, how do we gauge what money or what deals we would even spend money on otherwise?
Well, we have to be totally careful too, because there's so many things that are coming into play here. Letters of intent, donative intent,
I'm not trying
all
to solve
these
the problem
things.
now,
But no, that's okay.
I knew I was going to get into
no,
that,
and
so
that's
I
okay.
apologize,
I'm thrilled we're talking about it. That's fine. But there are those many, many, many aspects that the city as facilitator may not want to get involved in. I mean, even land trusts will always say we never give tax advice, we never blah blah. So we have to be careful as to how we tie tie that expectation from the city and then reimbursement and whatever. But no, totally. I hear you, Joe.
To the extent the council is talking about basically trying to monetarily incentivize these sorts of transactions, my simple point is at some point that needs to be distilled into a policy.
Right.
It can't be on an ad hoc basis.
But well, I like the idea of, I mean, like you were saying, Laurel, about if you close by X and maybe even put in this policy and with X amount of conserved acres or whatever that benchmark is, then we go through with the reimbursing for your cost of your appraisal or whatever fee you might say. So then we're still not throwing good money after something that may not happen.
Yeah.
Well, see, and I guess that going back to what we were talking about earlier, really getting back to the process and recommendations to say, okay, let's outline it. What would be the process? Where can you use these incentives? How would we put in place?
Yeah.
I think that's maybe where you can come back to us after you put some thought in, but tell us how do we make it, like Joe said, where we actually have a tool that kind of outlines and then recommendation what we do.
Because Laurel, I've spent a lot of time for the high school that I went to. It was a private high school, and I was part of the development committee. I've spent a lot of time in living rooms talking to people about the benefits for leaving part of their estate to the high school or donating money or whatever. And I can tell you, for the kind of dollars we're talking about a long process that involves multiple, many sessions in the living room, sitting down and talking with somebody. The idea that this could be a 1 or 2 visit close kind of situation, I think is unrealistic. And and that's why I get back to this: what materials, what collateral do we have to promote this whole concept? Because this is something that needs to steep for long periods of time in people's minds, and before they come to a consensus that that's what they want to do.
That's exactly true.
So,
yeah.
No?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is just clarifying the message primarily, and that message has to be part of that process. I see you working a lot with our communications manager, Jason, in trying to get that done. Seeing that flow chart, I think, would be key. And also, Bo, in the whole big picture, this is one part of basically 3 buckets for any of our undeveloped land. I mean, obviously, they can do these easements to preserve it as is. If that doesn't work, then we can also try to convince a developer into a conservation subdivision, which we're talking about as well, separate from what we're talking about here. And the third one is, of course, they develop it as is with 1 acre lots. The problem is the 1 acre lots is the most clear process that everybody has going through. We need to be able to surpass that clarity with these processes and doing that. Everybody asked a lot of the questions I was thinking too, but the only one I did want to ask was if there was any kind of sense, and you can tell me no if it doesn't make sense, but any kind of partnering with real estate agents with regards to this process. I would be curious if there was any way to, obviously we have a message, but incentivize people to try to sell this process in any particular way. I don't know if anyone's done it anywhere else. But I could see that, I know there are land brokers that are out there and, may not be able to sell land for development or whatever, but at least give them an option of, well, if while they're out there and having these discussions as well, it'd be the same conversation, but it multiplies you, basically.
It does.
And, I just didn't know if that was an undertaking we would want to do with regards to educating them, if it made sense, if it doesn't, I don't know.
I've already spoken to several different real estate agencies because I had friends who were realtors, and I went and spoke to their weekly meeting thing, and that's great because it does get it out more, and it did enlighten the realtors to what they can do when they run into a landowner who has bigger acreage and is tired of running the horse farm, and what options there are. So that's an excellent idea to do that. I think that I know that my blog's been it's a blog has been on the website for a while, and I don't know how many people have read it or not. I don't know, Jason, if we can even keep track of that. I don't know, but I haven't written anything in a couple months, and we can keep doing that too. But certainly, any way that we can collectively spread the education and enhance the interest is awesome. And I really do, the more I think about it, Bill, like that idea about maybe looking at a committee's role as educator and assisting in the spreading of the word, if you will, and then from there building on the areas that need to be conserved. So, yeah, realtors are great. And I have a couple of meetings next week over the phone with a couple of other ones who have been calling and asking information. So,
cool.
Yeah, that's great.
One of the things that we didn't hit on, I guess, or dive deep into is the TDR as that plays in. Do we have a process already outlined that explains the TDR process, how it would work, how it should work?
It's a working document that's with staff right now, and we've started developing a document that looks at the process, what has to get done, and how to go about getting everything, all the ducks in a row to make it happen.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess kind of a sub-question underneath that is, when you do a TDR, is a conservation easement required? Is that part of the TDR? Is that a necessary thing?
Yes, because the conservation easement as a legal instrument will establish that those development rights associated with the land are extinguished.
Okay.
Right, and that goes on record to show perpetually that there are none left on that property.
So in that case, then you have to have conservation, you have to have someone who, land conservation land group basically says, yes, this property would qualify, we would take it in.
Well, the TDR is a little different because I've seen in different areas where the conservation easement, generally as a rule, to meet the IRS requirements, protects something as well as extinguishes development rights. But I've seen through different programs that use TDRs where the conservation easement is very simply an extinguishment of those development rights. And it doesn't necessarily protect anything. For example, take Bell Memorial Park. There's really not a lot to protect there, right? But there are development rights there. So that easement will be written in such a way that will protect that which is protectable, but it will also basically extinguish the development rights from the future forever. So that each document is written individually and uniquely for each property. So that's how the distinction is made. But in either case, you must have an easement to accompany the TDR deed that conveys those credits to put on record.
Okay. Do you have any idea when we think we're going to actually get that process or be able to see that process from council standpoint?
I will find out where it sits right now. How's that?
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, for
Okay.
purposes of just going forward from a staff sort of direction standpoint, you sort of hit on it earlier, but with respect to the next product that the council might want to see based upon Laurel's presentation, would you like to see the outline or the skeleton of a policy that is aimed at attempting to incentivize and sort of grease the skids with respect to some of these transactions, at least for the first couple, which I think that's been sort of the common theme tonight is that trying to get the first couple may in fact be the peeling back of the onion layer that will allow us to get more. And would it be, for instance, as simple as we'd like staff to bring back a proposal that says, so long as it survives legal muster, that the council will in fact appropriate some funds with respect to reimbursement for some of these these due diligence costs to try and incentivize these transactions.
Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those would be good. But the one thing I do want to see as well is maybe some marketing or promotional work with our communications manager to try to promote some of that as well, because we were talking about the transactional paperwork as the operations side of it, right? But then there's the marketing side of it too, and we really are at a point where we need to kind of get both of those together. So if we have the one without the other, I think we need to start seeing the semblances of that promotional aspect of this program. So I could see both.
I understand
that.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's some interest there.
Yeah, I think we need some process here to kickstart this whole thing.
And it's both financial and work. Some help. Obviously, can't do it all.
Yeah, and that's all so doable because it all exists. It's a matter of taking the information that's already out there and putting it under the Milton letterhead, And then, of course, working up policies and procedures, which are not hard to do at all.
So would you be doing all this, or are you getting support from staff?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that question. I guess that would be a call that I will find out. But I mean, because of my past history, I mean, I have policies and procedures that are standard in practice, so it's a matter of tweaking those and it's done. And it's the same with the marketing materials; they're very easily put together. So I guess it would be determining what will be used my time or what will be other people's time. Yeah, I don't know.
Just need a plan to get it done.
What?
Just need a plan and team.
Just gonna need a plan.
Done, right?
It's fine. Yeah.
Well, I can see a daunting task out here, and that's why I asked that question.
Yep.
Are you going to be able to do that, put it together, and if so, when could we expect it?
I don't know. And I think that it would be sooner rather than later because I think the importance of it is that. Sure. So, I think in December, I'm not sure what the calendar has for work sessions or whatever, but we could look at that and figure what's feasible to produce by then. I think it would be on a fast track for sure because I think it would be awesome to have it all in place so that basically in January we can kind of get out there running. Great. And in the process, and in the meantime, determine whether or not a committee will be put together too. Would be great.
And what makes sense is if you can get together with our staff and again, I think, the direction is there, Stacy and Carter. I think come up with some ideas how to get it done. Most,
Sounds great.
Efficient and quickest, and obviously you can do a lot, but, we need to support you with other.
Oh,
help
hey, I
and
don't need to work
whatnot
alone. It's perfectly
and all
okay.
that. Okay. Anything else? But I thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much.
For
I
your time
appreciate
tonight
it.
and all the time you've put
No, I
in.
appreciate
And
it.
hopefully we're.
Well, I appreciate the discussion. I think it was very fruitful, so
moving
thanks.
Forward. All right, thanks a lot. Judy, do you want to call the next item?
Our next item is RZ 1414, which is a discussion of an ordinance to amend Section 64, 1596 event, special indoor-outdoor of the City of Milton, Georgia Code of Ordinances to include provisions of Chapter 34, Article 3, Division 2, to streamline the existing regulation of special events and to limit sales from vehicles at special events, to provide for the repeal of conflicting ordinances, and to provide an effective date and for other lawful purposes. Mr. Jason Wright.
Hello. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I am here to bring you this special event code section. Essentially what happened was the city manager had asked me to take a look at the process. So we went ahead, took the application and sat with all the departments that it touched, kicked it around, ripped it up, figured out what probably the best way to do it was. And so we reconfigured the way that you apply for a special event here at the City of Milton so that you have essentially concierge service through Angela Thompson. And in that process, Robin McDonald was kind and wise enough to point out that the special event code section actually existed in two places. It existed in the zoning code, and then it also existed in Parks and Recreation code. Only Parks and Recreation had not touched special events since about 2 years prior when Angela moved into the communications department for innovation and engagement now. And so the idea was just to take the code from the Parks and Rec section, move it into the zoning section, which of course then kicked it into this process, put it in front of Planning Commission. And so what you see before you right here is what was in Parks and Rec, moved into the zoning code so that it's only in one code section. And then as it's moved through the city attorney's office with Mr. Paul Fricky, which was a real pleasure working with him, he's a great guy. And with our planning commission, you see the types of changes that they have requested. A lot of it is just, conflicting code language, or just, trying to shore up what we meant when we wrote the code a couple years ago, just to reflect our operational realities as they exist today. So if anyone has any questions, really, I'm here to take them, but it's a little bit, cut and dry. I mean, the code is pretty standard among municipalities. Probably the biggest thing that we found was that our code actually forbids sales from food trucks, vehicles, because it didn't contemplate food trucks at the time, because it had been written before food trucks came to Georgia. So then we just, we changed that just to say that you can sell from a car, but it has to be, we have to know that it's a food truck. You can't just drive up in a car and start selling on the back of it. Yes.
What are the on the markups here? What are
Yes.
the reds and the
What's the
blues?
code?
Okay,
Yeah, that was
okay,
my
yeah.
question.
So the red is where it came from Parks and Recreation and then moved into the zoning code.
Okay.
Blue is Paul Fricky. Yellow is the Planning Commission. And then purple is where he just struck it. Entire sections. And wanted to change wording. Paul Fricky, I mean.
Yep.
So we've got strike-throughs coming from different places.
Absolutely,
So that's
yes.
just your cleanup, but
Yeah.
the red came from the Parks and Rec, we're now incorporated into this one place.
Yes.
Okay.
Blue is the city attorney's office once again. Yellow is planning commission. And then purple is, that's also city attorney's office. It's just if something needed a little bit more, oomph, or to completely strike it or change the wording. Like where you'll see on page 5 of 7, where the city manager finds that instead of based on specific actual findings. Paul Fricke, we didn't need specific actual findings, so where the city manager finds that.
And it looks like the planning commission basically was just some cleanup things. Just
Absolutely,
on first glance.
yes, yeah. Very minor, but very helpful, absolutely.
Okay. It's like the lawyers, once again, they added the most to it.
That's a surprise.
Well, I have to say, in a lot of sections, it definitely needed it because it hadn't been touched in, 5-6 years. So it definitely needed us going through it and shoring it up.
Anybody else? Matt?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
So it'll come back before you at the next council meeting, and then because it's in the zoning code. So the next time you see it, you'll vote on it, and then it goes into code.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Thanks,
for your time.
Jason.
I appreciate it.
All right, Carter, you're next.
I do have one public
Oh,
comment.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Got used to no comments.
And that's from Mr. Michael Cummings.
Okay, Mr. Cummings, come on forward.
Good evening. My name is Michael Cummings. I reside at 14945 Freemanville Road. I want to thank you for the opportunity to express my concerns regarding the proposed intersection projects on Freemanville Road. I learned about the proposed changes to these intersections in this room on September 17th at the open house. I was told of all the wonderful attributes of roundabouts. They're 35% more efficient than stoplights, less expensive to maintain, accidents are less severe. In other words, roundabouts will be a panacea for all of Milton's traffic challenges. They'll put an end to world hunger and ensure Georgia Bulldogs win a national championship. Well, I made up the last two, but you get the point. The person was pretty excited about roundabouts. A couple weeks later, I sat in the same room and watched a presentation on conservation subdivisions. I found it ironic that when it comes to land, we use words like preserve and conserve, and we try to limit the number of houses on the land. There's no discussion about roads. Laura gave a very nice presentation for over an hour. No one mentions a road. Our policy on roads is to put as many vehicles on as they can through roundabouts shooting cars out like a machine gun, not realizing that our road policy and our land policy have to work hand in hand. Conserving land and density and putting too much volume on the roads will negate anything we do on the land side. Now let's talk specifically about these intersections. I happen to own the land at the corner of the southwest corner of Freemanville Road and Birmingham Road. I probably know this land better than anybody in the city. It's 21 acres. In the morning, all I'm going to do is move the bubble down the hose. Because people exiting that roundabout, which is highly efficient, have nowhere to go other to another intersection. That's inadequate. We're going to back up Red Road so people in Thompson won't be able to get onto Red Road. Roads like Densmore and others we're going to send them to another stop sign. Whatever time they gain at this intersection, they're going to lose someplace else. Now, I don't think we're improving anything. If there are gains, we're going to increase the volume from traffic diverted into Milton and increasing nothing but more volume on our roads, affecting everybody on the other side. The afternoons, I think, are worse, and here's why. We've got the horse in front of we've got the cart in front of the horse. We've got an intersection at 372 in Birmingham Road that sometimes backs up all the way to Freemanville, even without the roundabout. Once the roundabout is in place, it's going to back up there more often for longer periods. No one coming from Hopewell will be able to enter the roundabout. Traffic's going to come to a complete standstill. At least now, you can, with a stop sign, you go every other one. We're going to do nothing but clog this rotary or roundabout. It's different. So I think it makes no sense to address this intersection until 372 in Birmingham is addressed. And I know it's a state road, but I don't think the people who have looked at this have spent time up there at 5:30 in the afternoon and to see how it backs up into the rotary. So that's how that begins. consideration. It's not that roundabouts don't work. The problem is they work too well, and the rest of the system can't affect the pressure. Essentially, you're putting a jet engine in a Honda Civic. It's not that the jet engine isn't efficient. It's highly efficient. The fact of the matter is the system can't accept it. I know we hear complaints all the time about developers, right? I can't believe how many lots he's stuck in there. I can't believe houses so close to the road. I'm sure you hear, why can't you just stop them? Personally, I think roundabouts are a greater threat to our rural character than any developer. And I'll tell you why. A developer's impact is limited to the property borders and maybe the neighbors. The impact of a roundabout is miles and miles and miles. This roundabout at Freemanville and Birmingham will affect Freemanville, Dismore, North Valley, Red Road, Hopewell, Bethany, and on and on and on and on and on. Because the system isn't ready to accept the amount of volume that's going to come through it. I own 2 properties on Freemanville. In total, I control 38 acres. I've watched my fellow horse farmers leave Milton, drawn by cheaper land and lower taxes to the north. Invariably, their house has been sold, pasture and barns and riding arenas give way to another nondescript subdivision. So far, my wife and I have chosen not to sell. We accept higher taxes and a growing list of other impediments associated with owning a horse farm in Milton. But the one thing we will not accept is the feeling of becoming prisoners on our own property due to a constant stream of traffic, resulting from an intersection design which does not provide breaks in the traffic. In my opinion, it doesn't matter how efficient an intersection is if you can knock it out of your driveway. Now, I don't envy you with respect to the hard decisions you need to make regarding traffic challenges facing our city. But in order to make good decisions, we have to be realistic. And the reality is there's very little the city of Milton can do to improve trip times. The fact is, any capacity gains we make will be quickly negated by volume increases from communities to our north. They simply have too much undeveloped land. Said differently, they have more undeveloped subdivisions than we have unimproved intersections. I'm convinced we cannot roundabout our way out of this problem. I ask you to not destroy what little rural character we have left by trying to do so. Roundabouts have their place. In my opinion, their place is not this place. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Do you have any other public comments, City?
That's all, sir.
Okay. We'll open it up.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Is that on? Tonight is our next installment in our ever ongoing intersection improvement program. What we'll do tonight, we've tried to remain consistent in the format of our evaluations and our methodologies when we look at these intersections, and I know we've gone through a number of these in the past, so most of the information that you've seen before is included in your packet, and we'll touch on those, but we won't get into a lot of the details on that information unless you have specific questions on it. What I did want to do tonight is kind of go through how we got to where we are, what information we've gathered through the public information process, and where we've ended up with our concept improvement plans, and offer you an opportunity to provide any input, comments, questions that you may have at this point before we get to the point where we're finishing up the concept plans. So tonight we're looking at 2 intersections, Freemanville Road and Birmingham Road, and Freemanville Road at Providence Road. As we've moved through these intersections, these are intersections that were identified as priorities through our Transportation Master Plan, which was approved by the Council back in 2009. These intersections were identified either from peak hour delays, public comments, tied to intersection improvements along these corridors, or safety concerns that we had. And so from this graphic on the right, you can see that we've been working our way through and trying to tie these intersections together in a systematic way such that we do have an overall system improvement in place and a program to improve these system-wide rather than individually. I think we've seen with other intersection improvements we've had that the comments we just heard are exactly correct. As you begin to improve these intersections, you'll move the traffic more efficiently and you'll move them down to the next potential blockage point, and what we've tried to do in these programs is identify those points and move to those in a systematic approach. I wish we could take advantage and do every single intersection at one given time, but we just can't, and so we've tried to identify those in a priority that we could move through either from an east-west corridor or from a north-south corridor. The intersection at Birmingham Road and Freemanville Road is one that we are coordinating with GDOT, and we will look as we begin to program those for construction at where they are in their process and make sure that any intersection improvements that we do are coordinated with those efforts by Georgia Department of Transportation. We are trying to do that at Providence and Freemanville. We currently have the roundabout under construction at 372 and Providence, New Providence, and so we expect some of the same things that we saw at the Hopewell Francis Cogburn intersection, that improved efficiency at the 372 intersection. We'll probably add some additional traffic at Providence and Freemanville, and that's why that one was included in this particular study, so that we could be prepared for that in the future. So again, as we move through these, one of the primary things that we've looked at is what came out of the CTP. This particular slide shows you the projects that were prioritized in that report. Most are either complete, underway, or design is underway. And so we've gotten down to the Freemanville at Providence and Freemanville at Birmingham intersections where we're currently underway with our concept plan. As you remember, we generally try to like to keep one of these in concept plan, one in final design, and one in construction each year. And so we are moving through, right now we have the Hopewell at Birmingham and moving into construction, and these will be moving into concept and final design this particular year. When you look at this slide, just to give you a quick briefing on what this is, we looked at the crash history at both of these intersections. Those highlighted in yellow when we looked at the details of each of the crashes would be those that we felt were correctable either through the installation of a signal or through the installation of a roundabout. So at Freemanville, Birmingham, for instance, the yellow, any of those crashes we felt would be corrected by either improvement. The ones in the green were correctable only by a roundabout. So from a total standpoint, the roundabout would have corrected 10 of these accidents. The signal would have corrected 5. Same thing over there at the Freemanville and Providence, same color codes. So in May of 2014, we began this project. We've gone through with boundary and topo information to assist us in the development of the concept alternatives. And on September 17th, we held a open house here at City Hall to allow the general public to come in and give comments on those. We also held, and still are holding, online information so that we'll take comments all the way through this concept design phase. And I'll let Sarah kind of walk through what we received from a comment standpoint from the general public. In the package that you received tonight, we've provided in the back all of the written comments that we had, so you could get a good idea about the types of things we were hearing in that meeting, and Sarah will kind of walk through some of the highlights of that.
So we put out an online survey as well as had surveys at our open house on September 17th. And between those two sources, we've gotten 100 survey responses. And then we sent out some letters about the meeting tonight to the potentially affected property owners. Asked a couple main questions on the survey. First of all, should the intersections be improved? And both of them were around 20% said that improvements weren't needed. We looked back at the last two concepts we've done, and there's been around 15% that have typically said improvements aren't needed. So this is a little higher than what we're used to seeing, but in that range. And then the preferred alternative, you can see the roundabout was preferred at a higher percentage, and that the do-nothings were even a higher percent than the signal turn lanes from the survey results. We like to take the addresses that are provided and map those so we can get an idea of where the comments came from. So you can see on the left is the Birmingham map, and the right is the Providence map, with a good portion in the project areas. And then just to highlight a few of the comments, we got 16 responses from the Holcomb's Farm subdivision, which is at the Providence-Freemanville intersection. It's on both the northeast and the southeast corner of the intersection. And we did hear a lot of comments too that State Route 372, Birmingham Highway at Birmingham Road needed to be looked at the same time, and that the main concern is during peak hours at these intersections, and some of those were in support of improvements, and some were that if it's just the peak hour problem, then to just let the intersections do nothing. Yes. There we go. And I'm going to turn it over to Richard Fangman with Pond and Company, who did the traffic study and put together concepts for us to go through some of these traffic elements.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay. Yeah, good evening. I guess we looked at the traffic operations at these intersections. We took traffic volume counts of both turning movements and regular traffic volumes during the AM and PM peak hours. We also observed during off-peak hours to kind of see how long the peaks lasted, and it seemed to occur that the backups are primarily during the AM and peak hours with today's conditions. We ran an intersection analysis using the level of service, where level of service A and B are the best levels of service. E and F are really considered failing and unacceptable levels of service. The map, the table that you're seeing there, we highlighted the ones that are level service F. There's a couple of E's on there too that probably aren't highlighted. But looking at that existing intersection, what we're seeing now is that the AM peak hour, because we had a highest concentration even within the peak hour of traffic coming at one time and primarily in one direction, eastbound, that had some of our highest backups. Now, the flip side of that would be, I guess, the backup from the Birmingham Highway at Birmingham Road intersection during the PM, when it does go through the intersection, does cause quite a backup at that other intersection at Providence during that time period too. But if you look at the leftmost column, that's year 2014, and what it is, we're really on the very edge of the capacity of these intersections. And so when we look at this into the future and even out to 20 years, you can see that we're having many movements have failure that are expected at the intersections. And so we found and we think that we're going to have a worse condition as we move into the future even than there is today. Oops, I'm sorry, hit the wrong button there. So then we looked at how the traffic was distributed during the AM and PM peak hours, and basically in the AM peak hours, there's primarily an eastbound movement of traffic as well as southbound, and in the PM peak hours, primarily westbound and northbound movement of traffic. So without going into all those details there. We also looked at growth projections, and we found that the growth rate we used, so we tried to look at what's going to happen into the future to get to year 2027. We found that growth trends now are showing that we're around 2% to 2.5% growth per year. I think we used 2.7%. That was kind of the highest trend. We used that for about 5 years. But then in the long term, we tend to use the 1.4%, which is your long-term growth rate from your CTP. So we tried to make sure that we anticipated, by using that larger growth rate, was anticipating some of these developments that are online now that have been approved to move forward, that'll be coming online in the next few years in that shorter-term growth rate. So then we looked at different design alternatives. One was to do a no-build with just the all-way stop control. Again, we had failing approaches sort of now and at 2017 in all cases there. In 2017 and 2037 in all cases there. And then the stop control, we looked at what if we just added right turn lanes to the stop control condition we have out there? Can we help things? And we found that even there, we're having enough through volume and volumes on those single lane approaches that with a stop control that we were going to be failing also during those time periods. So then we looked at two cases, the roundabout and a traffic signal. And the next one you see down is kind of the 2A as a roundabout, where we just use a single lane roundabout with no additional auxiliary lanes at all. And we found that those worked marginally well at the Freemanville and Birmingham intersection, but we also had more failing at the Freemanville and Providence without having some of the auxiliary lanes. So we'll show you what those look like here in the drawings in a minute. Then we looked at with adding some of these bypass lanes, we could get acceptable level service at roundabout. Also with the signalized intersection with left turn lanes, we have a good level of service, acceptable level of service with those. the difference there, one difference to point out is that when you look at the signalized level of service, there's the delay is sometimes a little higher. When you look at the methodology that the Highway Capacity Manual uses, which you all look at here in the city, for a traffic signal, we sort of allow ourselves to have a little more delay than we do at an unsignalized intersection. That's just the way the methodology works, and I think it reflects the fact that if you're at a traffic signal, you know that you're at least going to get a chance, so your people are willing to accept slightly higher delays sitting at a traffic signal. So that's just to be said that, that the traffic signal does end up operating with slightly higher delay than the roundabout does, and still both of them considered to be acceptable levels of service. So we looked at what would be the footprint here as far as effects on right-of-way at the intersection with the two options. And so this is the one at Providence and Freemanville, and you can see the green is showing the amount of right-of-way that would be needed to accommodate the left turn lanes, and there is more right-of-way that would be needed to accommodate the roundabout condition. And you can see that it's also all on the western end. Our first concept had shown the roundabout to be kind of centered on the intersection, and then due to comments we received in the public meeting and some of the impacts we're going to have on the properties to the east that were already occupied, we found that by shifting it further to the west, it did increase the amount of right-of-way overall that was needed to be taken, but it also did it on properties that did not have active uses right there, close and adjacent to the roundabout. This is the intersection of Freemanville at Birmingham, and you can see there's not quite as much right-of-way needed. There's not quite as big of a footprint on this roundabout as you'll see in a minute. But then again, on both these cases, the case with the traffic signal does require less right-of-way to be taken and needed for those intersections. So this first intersection is I can't read which one that is.
Birmingham.
Birmingham. Okay. Freemanville at Birmingham. So that's the one with the traffic signal there, and for some reason the north arrow is oriented to the right on that drawing, so it's a little bit off from what
Is there a wider right-of-way distance on Birmingham Road than Freemanville Road, or are they the same?
They should be approximately the same right-of-way, as far as existing right-of-way, or as far as...
Yes. Were they 60 feet on Freemanville? Is that right, sir?
I think that sounds right, but...
It's either 50 or 60.
Yeah. Is it the same on Birmingham Road?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I thought they were both approximately the same right-of-way on those two roads. And you can see here this design's a little bit symmetric. There's also a part of the trail section in these designs which takes up some of that space as well. Since this is ultimately a plan for your trail network, we've shown that on here and in the right-of-way calculations.
I guess my point is there seems to be less property acquisition required at that intersection than Freemanville Providence for a roundabout.
Okay.
So I would assume...
Part of that's the geometry of the roundabouts. I think when you see the two of them, you'll see a little bit of why that is also. Okay. I think that the right-of-ways are fairly similar. This is the one at Freemanville, and if not, we'll go back to that question. Let's look at what they look like, and then you might see. So this is the one at Freemanville at Providence, and here we found that
Birmingham.
No, I'm sorry, yeah, Birmingham, and so the traffic that's very heavy from Birmingham coming to the east is going through, but also turning right to go south. So about 30% of that traffic is going south on that critical movement, and so what we have done there is put in a right turn lane, so there's an additional lane for folks who are going right to kind of bypass, and that pulls that traffic out and allows the roundabout itself to operate more efficiently.
Those pictures you showed earlier with the right-of-way, include those turn lanes. That's this design with the right-of-way overlay on it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It does, and this just shows the signal at the Providence intersection, the signalized intersection. We'll go quickly through that so you can see the comparison of the roundabouts. So this roundabout has more space. This is the one at Providence Road. And what we found here is we've got a heavy eastbound traffic flow, but we have some traffic going to the south here, but we've also got some going to the north. So about 30% of the traffic is not going straight through, but it's going north or south. And so to make this intersection operate more effectively, we have put in an additional lane that also can make that so you almost have two lanes approaching the roundabout from the west heading eastbound. One of them can circulate around to go north. You've also got the right turn bypass lane there. And that's because that movement, again, is heavy. And we've also got, in the afternoon, we have traffic coming, from the north and from the west, northbound and westbound coming back in from those two directions. In the morning, we have more of a concentration of that traffic coming eastbound than we do coming southbound. And so we have found that is creating a challenge there, which is why that's blown out more. So that's why there's a few more property impacts. And so as we shift that intersection, we shifted it a little bit to the west also to try to avoid those properties. So you can see actually some of the existing road in the southeast corner that's uncovered. So you can see it's not, we're not covering over all the existing right-of-way and then taking as minimal right-of-way as we can. We're shifting a little bit to the west. So there's some area there where there's actually some road that's there now that will be taken up and not utilized to try to avoid having more impacts on those properties that are pretty adjacent on the eastern side of that intersection. And I'll just go back. So that compares to the traffic signal again at that intersection.
One question.
More
Going back to the
symmetric.
roundabout for a second.
Yeah, sure.
So people going north on that, north is going to the right, right?
That's cool.
No, north is going up. It was only that one.
So it's going north. Okay, so this is going to the going east on that. You don't worry about people going straight, all of a sudden going into the left turn lane. Into the roundabout. I'm just.
Oh, I see what you're saying. People who are going. Well, no, and this is shown in concept, but there's a signal, not a signal, a symbol that we put on the pavement at each of those. We don't think that those folks will go straight into the left turn lane. You're talking about the folks that are going in which direction now? The northbound?
If you're going east, you want to if you want to turn north, I guess it'd be in the far left lane. But I'm just thinking
okay.
going straight, you don't actually go north accidentally on that. But
Yeah, I think with any of these multi-lane approaches, there is a little bit more of a learning curve than with a standard
Yeah.
single-lane roundabout.
You're right.
Has a lot to do with signing and marking coming into it to make sure everybody gets in the appropriate lane. And then those who are common users of it, obviously, once you make that mistake once, you'll just get it.
Go around.
I guess that's true. Well, some of it's too the geometry. Like someone coming south, you can see the way that island is shaped. So someone coming south and coming down would naturally go into the lane that wouldn't be the left turn lane.
Right.
So to loop them back around. So someone coming southbound would be naturally kind of drawn into that correct lane. But Carter's exactly right. It takes a little more of a learning curve, and we need to make sure that we're very careful with the markings. But there's a lot of roundabouts like this around in the U.S. that have had this done successfully with the markings. The other thing to note is that on the northbound direction, once that left and through lane separate, the part that swings around and goes back north is only the width of one lane. So it's someone coming in from the south is not likely to be confused and jam up with two other. So we found that by adding an additional leg on one intersection movement, you can do that and still keep it pretty simple for the users. Once you start putting a two-lane roundabout around all the legs, that's when you have to be extremely careful as to which lane they're going to get.
So if I look at this, it looks like on the south side, you're doing a kind of change in the direction of the road like we did on New Providence and 372. We're moving it actually west to try to redirect versus where it kind of goes almost due north right now.
And that's partly, it helps with the redirection of the vehicles, but in this case, that shift to the west was primarily to try to avoid as much property
Instead of
impact to
going
the
into
east.
existing.
Yeah.
It's fairly similar to the configuration that we'll have at 372 in Providence, New Providence. We'll have a multi-lane approach on that too.
Okay.
Do you see a problem with the downgrade southbound on Freemanville Road going into the roundabout? It's probably 7-8%, something like that.
Yeah, it does. There is a downgrade there, but the roundabout we think can be, itself will be, able to be constructed in a way where you're on a level, or not perfectly level, but
Did you raise the elevation there to kind of compensate for that downgrade then?
What it would be is, that part that's on that edge would probably tend to be raised up a little bit. You don't want the grade in the roundabout to be too severe,
right.
But it would be, And it's a little bit similar to Hopewell and Birmingham. That roundabout that's being designed also has a downgrade. Approaching it, it might not be quite as.
And in the final design, we'll look at how that approach
have to
comes
look
in.
at that.
In this particular one, you see that splitter island's a little bit wider to flare that approach out.
Yeah.
So the more we can provide some warning as we come into that approach, probably the better off that will be.
Yeah. And you can raise that side up. If you raise it up too much, then you end up with the roundabout itself being on more of a grade than you want. So we have to kind of balance that in the detailed design, or whoever does the detailed design. Any other questions on this? I think we're then.
So with that, we wanted to give you an opportunity to provide any comments tonight if you had them. Also, that if you wanted to take this package with you, please feel free to go through it in a little bit more detail and look at the comments that we received. And over the next couple of weeks, if you could provide us some comments or input, we'd appreciate that. Our next step will be to work through the development of the concept plan and finalizing that, which we would bring back to you with a final recommendation from staff on how to proceed. And as always, we would put in a plug for our intersection project website, where we try and keep all of our intersection project information up to date for anyone who's interested in those particular projects. So if there are any more questions, we'd be happy to answer them at this point.
So Carter, if we wanted to put a halt on this whole thing right now, how complicated is that, and what's the process to follow?
Oh, you would just tell us to stop. Obviously, we are contracted through the concept plan, and we would continue with at least completion of the concept plan. But if council chose to go in a different direction or did not think that these were a priority, it's certainly up to you to make those decisions.
So where we are right now is strictly in the planning phase.
That's correct.
Everything's soft. There's no right-of-way that's been purchased. There's no money other than what little money has been spent on putting together some mock-ups and things like that.
That's correct.
So if we really did do some homework, and let's just say we happen to agree with some of the citizens that live in the area, or maybe landowners, we could actually change course and go somewhere else?
That's correct.
Okay.
Under our normal process, we would go through a concept development phase before we get into any final design.
Yeah.
So then the following year we'd be in final design, and this year we have one of these intersections programmed for final design. We haven't made that specific determination yet. And then the following year after that, we would move into construction with them. So we're still early on in the process, and an opportunity for everybody to provide inputs and comments on how we proceed with these projects.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Rick?
Can I ask a question about an existing project?
Certainly.
Do you have any update at all on 372 in New Providence and how soon we're going to get that completed? Because I'm getting, I don't know about you guys, I'm getting lots of calls.
Yeah, Sarah's been in contact with them, and she might have a little bit better update. As of our last update, we were probably 2 to 3 months out from completion. They are pushing the contractor to get to work. I see that he's been doing a little bit out there, hopefully trying to take advantage of some of this weather. Probably not fast enough for everybody, but unless you have anything different, I think we're at least 2 to 3 months out from completion on it.
I think he's into liquidated damages at this point, isn't he?
Yeah. He should be. I think the original completion date was October 1. And I understand.
So there's some incentive.
GDOT's been pushing that.
$200 a day.
240, 250. That's minimal. I was thinking it was 4 or something, but yeah. Okay. Any other, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, on the, just so you guys know, I mean, I'm at the Freemanville Birmingham intersection just about every other day as I go to that Publix to get something, and the traffic there is pretty bad. But this is actually the only project we have where Sudi sends a question whether or not we approve the contract right, a hesitation on it, just because I worry about the priority of this particular intersection versus some others that are coming up in our area, like Hopewell and Hamby is starting to get pretty bad, and then Hopewell and Thompson was backed up like crazy because of the effectiveness of a roundabout in Hopewell, Cogman, Francis. So, you know, in my thoughts as well, I think that we have some more dangerous intersections that might be a priority, although if we get this done too, they may be, this is the end of the 5-year plan, right?
Yes, I think if you... Who's got the clicker up there? If we go back up to the... Easier said than done. So of the list that was originally developed in the CTP, Bethany at Providence would probably be the next important one as we look at that east-west connectivity and moving from 372 to Freemanville to Providence. But yes, this is kind of the end of that list. I think we always try to look from a safety perspective at any of those intersections that may have had something happen to them during the 5-year program and try and prioritize those where we can. I think with these 2 intersections we've seen, from our perspective and in comparing to other intersections in our area, a pretty high accident rate over the last 5 years. So we felt like it was appropriate to move these forward. Certainly we do have our CTP program update this year, which we could roll this into that. We would be looking at these as well as any other intersections that may have come up over the last 5 years.
My thoughts on the situation as it is, Freemanville and Birmingham is going to get done eventually. We know that, and I like the roundabout idea when that is. From a priority perspective, if there was a replacement option, I'd replace Thompson and Hopewell first, just because of just what's going on with that. And then, but that's just my thought from what I see. I don't know all the traffic studies. It's your job, and I'm willing to be swayed on that end. So, but I do see that. And then the other thing is the Birmingham intersection. Obviously, we've talked about that and working through that. And of course, we want to make sure that we tell GDOT how we want them to do the intersection on that, but we're working on some issues with there. Although, when that gets done too, I had a buddy of mine that, was asking, hey, can you do something about the intersection of Birmingham? And I said, I don't know if I really want to, because I want you to get so frustrated that you go in there and shop. So, I understand from that perspective where it is, but I do think because of the traffic flow that we have, that we may have some more dangerous intersections just by speed and curvature and grade that I get worried about, and that's Hopewell and Hamby and Hopewell and Thompson. So just a thought.
Just a quick comment.
Okay, Bill?
Just a quick comment. Providence and Freemanville, I believe, was brought up back in 2006 or 2007, and it was going to be funded by the state at that time. And we decided to put it on the shelf and work on some other intersections. But I was working on Northwest Fulton Design Review Board back in 2003 and 4. We talked to GDOT about putting a roundabout there at 372 in Birmingham Road. And that was during the time period when the state wouldn't even talk to you about roundabouts. But I think in their newfound wisdom, I think they've learned to appreciate the value of them in moving traffic through. So I hope that's the next one we can do up there. I think as with any traffic improvements, and I think just about everybody can relate to Georgia 400 and how that has progressed over the last 15 years in widening it in sections. So to speak to Mr. Cummings' point there, as we do these projects, it just pushes the bottleneck further down the road. And that's just the nature of the beast.
Yes, and one of the reasons why we try to look at this as a holistic, system-wide approach, and we've just got to take them systematically. We can really only do one at a time as we move through these, and that's what we've tried to do, and is identify these as they occur along each of these corridors. Back to the Birmingham, I will say that we have met with GDOT on that particular intersection. It is going to be a challenge with the existing right-of-way that's in place, and they're doing some feasibility studies to really determine what they can do there. How they fund that will determine whether or not they have to stay within the existing right-of-way or work with the community to acquire some right-of-way. And once they've gotten through that feasibility study, we'll look at that as well in conjunction with the timing of our Freemanville-Birmingham intersection to make sure those are done really in conjunction with each other so that we don't create a worse situation at the other intersection with either of the improvements. So that is something that we're coordinating with GDOT right now.
I think the overwhelming point, too, is the development in Cherokee County, which is just aggravating our situation here, and we're having to deal with it.
Yes, that is true. With any of our transportation issues, unfortunately, that is something that we have to deal with system-wide, and why we'd really try to look for regional approaches to a lot of these situations when we can, as well as alternative funding sources when they're available, because it's just not something that we have complete control over when we're dealing with traffic from surrounding areas.
Okay, anything else? Thank you, and thank you to the audience, presenters, and comments from the citizens too.
Thank you.
We'll conclude our work session then.
Do we have one more?